Teachers and or college board graders, what is the funniest response you got on a test when the student didn't know the answer? I graded AP exams this summer. For one essay question, I got an awesome barbecue sauce recipe from a kid in Tennessee. I've made it a couple times, and it's excellent. I was marking a final year engineering test odd lecturer, and instead of answering the last question some guy drew an incredibly detailed portrait of himself serving fries at a McDonald's with the caption, "Me if I fail this." I still had to fail him, but I did feel bad about it. Some say he's serving fries till this day. It wasn't for a test, but a large portion of the class didn't do an assignment, so the teacher decided to assign a makeup assignment. He wasn't planning on assigning anything, so he asked the class for ideas. Someone said an essay about procrastination and he said I like that idea, and the conversation ended with that. Next class rolls around and someone turns in an essay titled The Importance of Effective Communication because he never actually assigned the essay. I was helping a teacher grade back in high school, and I was grading a kid's geometry quiz. The question was a 2-column proof and it asked him to prove that one side was congruent to another based off of 2 triangles being congruent. Had to prove the 2 triangles were congruent first. This was his whole answer. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle BCD because they kinda look the same. Side AB equals side DB because they're both 3 eraser lengths long. Frick, proofs so much. Those things were impossible. Just another student. We had a test which involved a sex education part. The question was, what are 2 causes of infertility in males? His response, lack of penis. He tried to argue that he wasn't wrong and somehow got a mark. College level physics exam asked for a brief description of Maxwell's theory. The instructor shamed the student by reading aloud his answer, good to the last drop. As a teacher's assistant in my high school grading chemistry tests, for one question which read, convert 1 meter into mm, one student had converted meters to yards to feet to inches to centimeters to millimeters rather than just multiply by 1000. My high school teacher would always encourage us to write funny answers down if we didn't know anything. She found marking tests extremely boring, so if we could make her laugh, we'd at least get 0.5 of a mark on it. Same, but without the points for a wrong answer. That is actually what prompted this question. My AP Euro Hist teacher encourages funny wrong answers. Go to come up with substitutions for a lot of wrong answers. The student knew the answer, just didn't know how to spell it. I taught history and showed a video clip of Ronald Reagan's famous Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. In a later quiz I asked students to write down this quote with my favorite response starting Mr. Gorbachev. I had one ESL student who couldn't quite get the hang of changing singular nouns into plurals. I have a pen got him full marks on the unit test. I have 2 penis did not. Double dong dude has really crappy grammar. It wasn't an answer, it was a proposition. Saw a post on Reddit where someone drew a picture and got credit for it for a test answer, so I did the same thing on my next science test. Teach told me that my drawing of a giraffe was garbage and gave me nothing. Should have told him his test was garbage. I was student teaching 1st grade and was quizzing a student on sight words. The word was horse and he said W. I'm a teacher that hasn't gotten any super funny answers yet, but when I was a student, my philosophy class did a group thing about a test. Our professor had told us at the start of the quarter that when we did the final, if every single person turned in the test that is blank except for a name, we would all get an A. Apparently he had made this offer to every class for years. Well, of the 20 or so of us in the class, only one person was passing. We all thought the teacher was a dong, so when it came time for the final, he passed out the test and left to go to his office. After he was gone, we all talked about it, and those of us who had bad grades said we have nothing to lose by turning in a blank paper. We are failing anyway. And then we looked at the one guy who was passing. He said, I'm a philosophy major, so I just want to find out if he means it or not. Let's do it. So we all wrote down our names on our individual tests. Then we lined up and went to his office and one by one handed him our blank tests. He was shocked. We were the first class to pull it off. He made us promise not to tell anyone and he did give us all 100% on the final. I clearly did not keep my promise about not talking about it. I'm a philosophy major, so I just want to find out if he means it or not. Let's do it. Rock on, philosophy dude. One time a kid in my Latin class started sneezing out various denominations of bills when turning in his test. The total added up to $75. I think he dropped the class. Well, we know the money was green. When my wife and I were TAs in grad school, we proctored and then graded an essay exam. We had a student write, "I don't know, so here's a picture of a puppy." He then drew a beautiful picture of a puppy. It took him nearly an hour to complete it. To this day when I ask my wife a question and she doesn't know the answer, she just says, "Puppy." What is this, Tay? Because I think it may mean something different to what I am used to. Well, I'm not a grader, but I've got one. An old teacher of mine used to grade AP stats tests, and he said a student once drew an elaborate Rube Goldberg chain reaction type thing across 2 pages for a short answer. Meanwhile, every other student is internally panicking at what calculations require 2 pages. Not me, but a classmate of mine. In my 8th grade social studies class, the teacher offhandedly mentioned necessity is the mother of invention. On the test, one question was, is the mother of comma. My classmate wrote Mary is the mother of Jesus. We were all really upset that he didn't get credit. 8th grade free response question. Explain how the United States acquired the Louisiana Purchase. My answer, the United States purchased Louisiana. I received full credit. They paid Napoleon with money. Got to teach a technical theater class and gave a quiz at the beginning to see what the kids knew. One of the questions was name a good conductor. I was looking for a metal conductor like copper or brass. Ended up with several answers like Leopold Stokowski, Leonard Bernstein, and several famous composers. We all had a good laugh when we went over the answers. You probably should have clarified. In high school we had to fill out forms. Next to sex, I wrote not yet, totally forgetting they were asking for gender. A bit different, not quite a test. Class was reading a play in English Lit during junior year. We were rotating parts between students through the various acts. Point being that we did actually have parts, so people weren't necessarily focusing on the story as much as they were on when it was going to be their turn. Some girl's line comes up and her character is mentally handicapped. The line read makes horse sounds. She started to neigh. I dunno about credit, but we all had a good laugh. I hated that crap. It would become my character's line and I'd be 38 chapters ahead and no idea where the rest of the class was because they read too dang slow. Not me, but on a sample essay I read for AP World History they were listing evidence for a question related to American Indians. One kid wiped his blood on the exam sheet and wrote this is a blood sacrifice to the sun god of the Incas. Sadly he didn't get credit. Sun god prefers beating hearts to blood. Be glad that all that happened was him not getting credit. The sun god could have gotten angry and left the world in eternal darkness. Not a teacher, but in German secondary school and chemistry a student didn't know the answer for a question and wrote KP on the paper. KP is short for keen plan, which basically means no clue. The teacher thugs it stands for Kochpunkt, which means boiling point, and it was the correct answer and she even got full credits on that one. I took a philosophy class in high school. For the final paper we had the option to write an essay arguing to the teacher that we were not a figment of his imagination. I decided to do the opposite. I wrote a whole essay about how I was a figment of my teacher's imagination. I ended up with a B in the course. That was the only assignment I handed in for the entire course. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was in a biology class, and the very first test I was clueless. At this point in time, I didn't quite know the teacher or his style or anything about him, really. So naturally, clueless on the essay question, I decided to go meet her and write a speech about how I was bombing the test. I compared it to Harry Truman deciding to nuke Japan, and how that was thought to save lives. By my own nuking of the test, who knows, maybe I could do the same. I got a call from my mom later on. He didn't like it. In fact, he decided to interpret it as a bomb threat. Needless to say, it was a rough semester. He decided to interpret it as a bomb threat. I can't stop laughing. I was one of the last classes to take a hotly contested statewide standardized exams. In its dying days, some big muckety muck decided it would be a great idea to add a science portion to the exam. Their mistake was telling my class that we were the first class to take it and therefore were simply testing if it was useful for the school board, and our results on that section would have no bearing on our final test results. The question was something like, Susie and John have a heavy box. They need to put the heavy box on a shelf but it's too heavy. They have several pieces of wood, a handsaw, a pulley, etc., etc., etc. Design a system for moving the box to the shelf and explain why this works in scientific terms. My response: Susie and John could do many things. They could build a lever, as you're obviously suggesting they do with the boards, but the box would likely slide back down the lever and kill Susie and John. Here is a drawing of Susie and John dead under a box. They could build a pulley, but I don't want to explain how that works. And also, if they're too small to reach the shelf with the box, how the frick are they going to attach a pulley to the roof? Drawing of Susie and John looking sad as their parents yell at them for screwing around with the garage ceiling. My recommendation is that Susie and John open the fricking box and move everything individually like normal human beings. Picture of Susie and John high-fiving and saying, "Gee Willowokers, we did it." Since the test was unscored, I never found out how they liked my solution, but I hope I gave some old ladies a few conniption fits. That science portion, I was one of the lucky shoots who got to test it out on the 4+ HRACT exam. Nobody had told us ahead of time and it had never been tacked onto one I'd done before. I was so pee. They did grade ours though, so I couldn't just walk out. Not a teacher or anything, but here's a related story. An acquaintance of mine didn't know what to do on a Spanish 2-unit test, so he attached a $20 bill to the test when he turned it in. He never saw it again and received an F, but it didn't bother him. Kid was balling out in drug money. Phew, that's a receipt. Not exactly an answer to the prompt, but at my high school, thanks to my friend, we now have the AP Stats Challenge. Get a 5 on the test while writing the entire free response portion in haikus and only haikus. So far I think 5-10 people have pulled it off, and it definitely made the test a lot more entertaining for me. I used the same 5 haikus for every poetry assignment in all of my school classes, 5th grade through college. Always got an A. Only really did work once. It was glorious. Not a teacher, but in AP Physics 2 on a practice test, so naturally I didn't care as much. When asked to solve for the mass defect, I explained how mass effect drives work in great detail as well as different uses. I think my teacher liked it because he wrote "This is my favorite store" on the Citadel instead, marking it wrong. Funny this comes up as I am writing a year 12 ORS physics assignment comparing Mass Effect to Halo in terms of how realistic their methods of travel are. Not a grader, but on the AP exam for world history, a friend of mine, rather than actually write an essay on one of the assigned topics, described the plot of Mulan. That is my second favorite story involving her. For one of my AP English essays, I spelled out "help, I'm trapped in an AP test facility" down the left side of the page. I received a 4/5 for the exam. Purposefully easy extra credit question asked, "Who is your favorite founding father, and why is it Alexander Hamilton?" I responded with Aaron Burr and drew a short stick figure montage of their famous duel. Knew the answer, but decided to be flippant regardless. Still got full points. Once on an endocrinology exam I was sitting. The last question required everyone to reference 5 RCTs published in a journal in APA format. No one had been told that anything like this would be on the exam, and obviously no one is going to remember all the authors of a study off the top of their heads. So being my frustrated self, I referenced "How to Be an Absolute B" by lecturer's name. 2 weeks later I got called into her office and was made to apologize and told not to do this again. I'm sorry that you're B. There's a subject in England called General Studies. It's the only core subject at a level. 90% of universities don't count it towards entry, and 100% of the top universities don't. So it's basically a wasted 2 hours of your life. My General Studies paper consisted of me writing out the lyrics to every WWE entrance theme I could think of. We don't actually do General Studies anymore. Year 13 now. I'm the student in this case. I'm taking AP Calculus, and it's absolutely kicking my butt. When I didn't know an answer, I wrote a prayer to the god of math. O Lord of math, grant me thy favor, that I may understand this, thy holy work. For I am as yet powerless before your tests, and weak in my calculations. Amen. I got 1/2 credit. Not a grader, but on my APCalc test last year there was one question that I had no idea WTF they were even asking. After staring at it for about 10 minutes I gave up and drew a portrait of the proctor surrounded by velociraptors and climbing up a rope from a helicopter. I like to think I got at least partial credit for that. I did something similar. I just completely blanked on a calc question. So I drew a picture of a cat and wrote, I don't know what to do here. So here's a kitty. My professor wrote back, kitty says, find the derivative and expand. I'm not a teach mantra of the topic here, but I was taking a film history and appreciation class at college and came across this question. What is a camera obscura? My answer was, the type of camera a hipster uses. I got no points, but my professor said he got a good laugh out of it. Biochemistry exam. There was a complicated synthesis question. How would you produce X? That the student answered with blood magic. The answer was written in blood. I asked about it later. The student had gotten a paper cut when taking the test apparently. I have never had a paper cut that bled. Test included reading a map of Rome and finding your way around using coordinates. QN. How can you get to the Colosseum from the starting point? Plot out a route on the grid provided. ANS. I don't need the grid because I've played Assassin's Creed Brotherhood enough to know where I'm going. Sigh. Should have written back that he couldn't fast travel. In Spanish, we were doing the food kitchen unit and basically had a question like it's what you use to wipe your mouth. I knew we definitely had a napkin word at the unit la servileta, but couldn't remember what it was, so I wrote down la mano, hand. It was marked wrong and the teacher just wrote number. You could also say manga de la camisa, shirt sleeve. I got one from both sides of the spectrum. Once in advanced calculus, the final question was something which I had no clue how to answer, so I just wrote in the entire space 7. Turned out 7 was the correct answer, however I got no credit for it for not showing any working. As a marker at university, I was going through the tests and a question was, accounting. Describe a transaction which causes a decrease in an asset and also equity. A student's answer was a building caught on fire and got destroyed. Technically he was correct, although it wasn't really a transaction, more an event. I used to compete in academic decathlon in HS, and my teacher advisor was almost always selected to grade the prompted essays for the event itself. She explained to us that one year, about 2 years before I joined the team, they got an essay in Spanish. Now there were no rules at the time about in what language your essay could be written, and the other graders were at a loss. My teacher minored in Spanish and routinely spoke it fluently, so she volunteered to translate it for the graders. Instead of an essay about westward expansion during the 19th century or whatever that year's prompt was, the kid had written a 4-page essay about hooking up with various fake celebrities over his summer vacation. Needless to say he did not score well on that portion of the event. On a quiz in Bio 2 it asked what group a certain organism was in. I didn't know, so I put Blue Man Group. My Tay apparently liked it because I got the point anyways. I don't know why this is so funny. Question. What are your opinions on sex before marriage? 16 marks. Answer. I wouldn't buy a car before test driving it. Q. What is X? A. It's certainly not Y. Q. State the differential and integral form of Hooke's law. A. The differential and integral form of Hooke's law. Full credit on each. In 12th grade me and a buddy of mine, let's call him Tom, were both in the same calculus and vectors class. I had already decided to major in history at university so my mark in this class didn't mean too much to me. Anyways, during the exam I got to a question which asked me to graph the derivative of a given function. Not knowing what it was, I simply drew a kitty cat face on the graph, cause frick it, and moved on. About 10 minutes later, Tom, who was sitting beside me, discreetly gets my attention and I see he's stuck on that same problem and hoping I'll help him out. Chuckling to myself, I turn to the question on my exam and move it over slightly. Seeing what I had done, Tom shook his head, quietly whispered frick it, and did the same thing. Suffice to say, our teacher was less than happy with us after the exam. I'm a student too, but I generally like to answer a question with a narrative sentence based around the word or question I was asked. Recently there was a test I took with vocabulary on it, and one of the words was ananoresis. Now, I had forgotten what the answer to it was at the time, so instead I answered Anna was ignored by a girl named Isis. I have no idea why Anna was ignored by Isis. Anna was a pretty upstanding girl with plenty of friends and a nice personality. Isis was probably just being her usual self. Not sure how my teacher responded. I'll find out tomorrow. But yeah, that's generally how I go about answering those kinds of questions. Back in the 3rd grade, I had a 2-part written question on a science test. Part 1. If you had to change the gas nitrogen to a liquid, how would you do it? My answer: I would change it to a liquid. Part 2. Explain what would happen. My answer: it will change to a liquid. Funny thing is, I actually got full credit. My teacher wrote something like, I can't say that this is what I was looking for, but I can't say that it's wrong either. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.